All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. It is Tuesday, and you know what that means. Normally, we would do the Dow now, but today is going to be a little bit less formal than normal because I have no idea where we are going to go. But it kind of feels good to have a fresh opportunity, a clean slate, so to speak. But I think don't overthink it. Could be the key lesson. Don't overthink it, ladies and gentlemen. This is a big book called Power versus Force by Dr. David Hawkins, The Hidden Determinants of Human Behavior. On the back here are some quotes that says, imagine what if you had access to a simple yes or no answer to any question you wish to ask? A demonstrably true answer, any question. Well, that's referring to kinesiology and muscle testing. Another one says, the universe holds its breath as we choose, instant by instant. Which pathway to follow? For the universe, the very essence of life itself is highly conscious. Every act, thought, and choice adds to a permanent mosaic. Our decisions ripple through the universe of consciousness to affect the lives of all. And the power of consciousness and the understanding of consciousness is very deep and fascinating, and one that really captures my interest and has for a very long time. Let me tell you a little bit here about David Hawkins. David R. Hawkins, MD, PhD, was a director of the Institute for Spiritual Research. You know, it's funny, I was just thinking, actually, this is where this channel began, I think. I was talking about David Hawkins in one of my first videos a long time ago. It's funny, I haven't gone back and looked at those first videos in a long time, but it's very funny how similar yet different it is. Some good ones, though. Some good ones. If you haven't seen any of my earlier videos and you're here with me now, then go check them out and you'll have yourself a laugh, I'm sure. But David R. Hawkins was the director of the Institute of Spiritual Research and remains a widely known authority within the field of consciousness research even after his death in 2012. It seemed like a lot of very great figures passed in 2012. That's interesting. He wrote and taught from the unique perspective of an experienced clinician, scientist, and teacher, having been a life member of the American Psychiatric Association. So a lot of people that would, be talking about consciousness and the universe and our actions, as I was saying a minute ago, our decisions ripple through the universe of consciousness and affect the lives of all people. A lot of people would think that somebody coming with that perspective isn't somebody who is a scientist and, an experienced clinician. And it's just, there's a lot of skepticism nowadays, and stereotyping is, I guess, what I'm trying to say there. But having been a lifelong member of the Psychiatric Association with 50 years of clinical experience, his background and research is outlined in Who's Who in America's Who's Who in the World. He was honored worldwide with many titles and had been knighted. Wow. Had been knighted and honored in the East with the title Te Reung Sun, foremost teacher of the way to enlightenment. I was going to butcher the rest of that, so I didn't want to. But foremost teacher of the way to enlightenment. Dr. Hawkins lectured widely at universities, Harvard, Oxford, etc., and also spiritual groups from Westminster Abbey and Notre Dame to Catholic, Protestant, and Buddhist monasteries. See, it's interesting also how there's this stereotyping or this quick to separate things. It's like we live in a world of gray when everybody wants it to be this or that, and it's and usually instead of this or that, it's this and that. But when it comes to enlightenment and certain, you wouldn't think, at least from the perspectives that I've been raised to look at, Catholic and Protestant and certain religious groups would be open to the ideas of enlightenment in the sense that that I discovered it initially. But it is fascinating that it's all connected. This spiritual reality that is behind dogmatic religion, it connects throughout. It is like the same way that blew my mind, that thought translates above language. So it's the base that it's based on. Let's see if we can find anything in here that is fascinating. I just seen a highlighted bit there a second ago. But like I said, totally informal, being free, because really you can do anything you want. And that's a great feeling. And so when you're not worried about trying to get views or, trying to be amazing and have the best presentation, then you can take it easy and relax. So if you're here joining me, then thank you. And I hope you got yourself a beverage, and we'll see what we can find in this Power versus Force from David Hawkins. Is this book really changed my life and had a huge impact on the way that I think about life through the lens of, things like consciousness and the soul and the deeper questions. On the first opening page, it has a little quote here that says, "The skillful are not obvious. They appear to be simple-minded. Those who know this know the patterns of the absolute. To know the patterns is the subtle power. The subtle power moves all things and has no name." Wow. That's exactly what the Tao said that we did in 86 episodes on this series previously. The same thing, and the same thing we also hear in the Hermetic wisdom that we do on Wednesdays. That was powerful, though. Those who know this know the patterns of the absolute. To know the patterns is the subtle power. The subtle power moves all things and has no name. So part one is tools, critical advances in knowledge and history and methodology. Fascinating. New horizons in research. Imagine what if, like we said earlier, you had access to a simple yes or no question. Any question you wanted to ask. And the answer that would be given would be demonstrably true. Think about it. The staggering implications suggest themselves immediately. What would happen to our ponderous and all too often flawed judicial system if there were a clear, excuse me, comfortable answer to the proposition, John Doe, quote unquote, guilty as charged, yes or no? And you could get an answer from the universe that would give you an accurate answer. But see, that's confusing to me, because going back to the idea of, black or white or gray or this and that or both, this and that, rather than or. What would happen to advertising? You get the idea, but the idea gets bigger fast, it says. And then it goes up to government. If, as has been said, man learned to lie an hour after he learned to talk, then a phenomenon such as the one we're discussing would be the genius of the most fundamental change in human knowledge. That's a philosophy that you would never really think of unless you were a deep kind of thinker. And apparently David Hawkins was. Let's see what he's talking about. Since the beginning of society, the transformation, he says and continues, would reckon fields from communications to ethics in our most basic concepts in every detail of daily existence, would be so profound that it is difficult to even conceive what life would be like in a subsequent new era of quote unquote truth. The world as we know it would be irrevocably changed right down to its very roots. And so, how could this be possible? And why is David Hawkins talking about this? Well, that comes to a little thing called kinesiology. What is kinesiology? I had no idea we would go this direction in this video, but here we go. Kinesiology is the study of muscles and their movements as applied to physical conditioning. Kinesis, movement, to move. The study of kinesiology first received scientific attention. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know if I've done many ladies and gentlemen's today. That's funny. Or maybe I just haven't noticed. But anyways, the study of kinesiology first received scientific attention in the second half of the last century through the work of Dr. George Goodhart. So kinesiology is not something new that a whole bunch of new agers or, whatever you want to call them nowadays came up with. Modern hippies. So this Dr. George Goodhart pioneered the specialty he called applied kinesiology after finding that benign physical stimuli, for instance, beneficial nutritional supplements, would increase the strength of certain indicator muscles. So it's like, what are you talking about? Just hold on a minute. It'll make sense. And this is amazing and mind-blowing. Whereas negative stimuli would cause those muscles to suddenly weaken. The implication was that at a level far below conceptual consciousness, the body, I'll add, like subconsciously, without you purposefully doing or thinking about it, the body, quote unquote, knew. Makes me have a funny thing my dad said about this guy he worked with, and he had a cooler, and it keeps things hot and it keeps things cold as well. And he goes, how do it know? How do it know? But the body seems to, quote unquote, know. And through muscle testing, once again, this guy was going through this experiment that he called applied kinesiology. Dr. George Goodhart, who was the pioneer of it, apparently. I mean, that may be debatable. I'm not sure. And I'm no expert on any of this. We're just having fun. And I read these things on my own anyway. That's kind of why I started doing these series like Wisdom of the Ages that we did previously. If you missed that, check it out. And Change Your Thoughts, Change Your Life that we just finished last week or, a week or two ago. But I would just be reading these by myself, and I like to ramble about this stuff to anyone that is interested and is willing to listen, or maybe that hasn't heard of it before and finds a sudden interest. But so here I am. I don't know if this will be what we'll continue to do going forward. If you think so, then let me know, but just messing around, and this is good stuff. This is good stuff. So, once again, Power versus Force, David Hawkins. We're reading for purposes of teaching and commentary, extrapolation, and expanding the mind, so that we can increase our understanding of the nature of reality, so we can in turn increase the quality of our lives. With that being said, back to the story about Dr. George Goodhart and applied kinesiology. So the body would seem to know, and through this muscle testing experiment, he was able to signal what was good and bad for it. The classic example, cited later in this work, is a universally observed weakening of indicator muscles in the presence of a chemical sweetener. The same muscles strengthen in the presence of a healthful natural supplement. In the late 1970s, Dr. John Diamond refined this specialty into a new discipline that he called behavioral kinesiology. Dr. Diamond's startling discovery was that indicator muscles would strengthen or weaken in the presence of positive or negative emotional and intellectual stimuli, as well as physical stimuli. So this is very interesting. A smile will make you test strong, while the statement, I hate you, will make you test weak. And anybody who's researched consciousness and the effect that focused intentions can have on things in experiments that have been done on water and ice forming in different patterns and with different symbols on the jar or with different thought focus. If you haven't ever heard of any of this and it sounds way crazy and it up in the clouds, don't worry, this actually exists. And it's a lot more amazing than you could possibly believe. So let's continue. Actually, the book continues. It says, before we go any further, let us just explain in a little detail exactly how one tests, especially as the reader will certainly wish to try this himself. Here's Dr. Diamond's outline from his 1979 book, Your Body Doesn't Lie, of the procedure adopted or adapted by him from the classic description in H.O. Kindle's Muscles, Testing, and Function. It takes two people to perform a kinesiological test. It says choose a friend or a family member for testing. We'll call him or her your subject. Number one, have the subject stand erect, right arm relaxed at their side, left arm held out parallel to the floor, elbow straight. You may use the other arm if you wish, it says. Now, see, I personally have never tried this and been compelled to do it a lot for myself because I'm not really seeking yes or no answers. But there's many more purposes for it that I took more of the consciousness philosophy from these books rather than the kinesiology part, but it plays a big factor into discussing the topic of consciousness and some of how that can be understood through kinesiology. And so hopefully you're interested in either one, but right now we're going through a simple outline of a kinesiological test and what they're talking about. So number two is face your subject, place your left hand on their shoulder and to steady them. Then place your right hand on the subject's extended left arm just above the wrist. Number three, tell the subject you're going to try to push their arm down as they resist with all their strength. Now push down fairly quickly, firmly and evenly. The idea is to push just hard enough to test the spring and bounce in the arm. So we're not trying to, but not so hard that the muscle becomes fatigued. There's not a question of who is stronger, but of whether the muscle can lock the shoulder joint against the push. See, this is very like, how did they come up with this? Assuming there is no physical problem with the muscle and the subject is in a normal, relaxed state of mind. receiving no extraneous stimuli. For this reason, it's important that the tester not smile or otherwise interact with the subject. The muscle will test strong. The arm will remain locked. If the test is repeated in the presence of negative stimuli, for instance, artificial sweeteners or, poisons or whatever that be, although you're pushing down no harder than before, the muscle will not be able to resist the pressure and the subject's arm will fall. A striking aspect, now back to the story, of the beginning of kinesiology and a description of it. Had no idea we were going to go this way. But back to the story of Dr. Diamond now. And it says a striking aspect of Diamond's research was that the uniformity of response among the subjects. And so, if you're like, okay, maybe I'm just coming up with crazy ideas and confirming my own results because it's what I want to find. But he says it was a striking aspect of that there was such a uniformity of response among his subjects. Diamond's results were predictable, repeatable, and universal. This is what makes it astounding to me, is that it's not just some fanciful, silliness that some metaphysics person is thinking up and wants to be real. They did this in a scientific way to produce results, which is wild. Because normally a lot of these things, when it comes to consciousness and stuff, it's hard to really produce solid results. But once again, I'm just rambling. Any of my points made can easily be argued by anybody, and that's just fine. The point here is that we're discovering and we're searching for those of us that have never gone this direction before. Or if you have, then thanks for being here. But this is amazing. This was even so where there was no rational link that existed between the stimulus and the response. For totally undetermined reasons, certain abstract symbols caused all subjects to test weak. Wow, that makes me think about symbolism and the power of symbolism. That's a deep study also. But abstract symbols caused all subjects to test, others made them test positive or strong. Some results were perplexing. Certain pictures with no overtly positive or negative content would cause all subjects to test weak, while other neutral, quote unquote, photos or pictures caused all subjects to test strong. So they're like discovering this weird judge, like good or bad system that's working for reality through muscle testing. Very abstract, but fascinating stuff. This is amazing. And so some results were food for considerable surmise, whereas virtually all classical music and most pop music, including classic rock, some of you that love these genres, caused a universally strong response, so a positive response. The hard or metal rock that first gained popularity in the late 70s produced a negative or weak response, which is fascinating. There was one other phenomenon. That previous statement could be related to harmonics and frequencies and the changes in tuning. It was funny, I play guitar, and when you change your tuning if you get an app or a tuner, you can change it from 440 to 432 or wherever you want, really. I never did any other ones. That might be interesting to test too, but it just sounds much more mellow, and I actually liked the notes better on the 432. It's just a slight bit lower, but it's fascinating. Wonder on the timing when that, things like that happen. Let's continue with what the book says, though. Quote, there was one other phenomenon that Dr. Diamond noted in passing. through devoting no deeper analysis to its extraordinary implications. Subjects listening to tapes of known deceits, Lyndon Johnson perpetrating the Tonkin Gulf hoax, Edward Kennedy stonewalling the Chappaquiddick incident. It's a tough one to say. Universally tested weak. While listening to the recordings of demonstrably true statements, they tested strong. This was the starting point of the work of the author of this volume, the well-known psychiatrist and physician, Dr. David R. Hawkins, in 1975, which leads to an understanding of consciousness that goes beyond the mind. It goes all the way to transcending the levels of consciousness. And maybe that'll be a good spot. I'll finish the sentence before we put the bookmark in there, though. The well-known psychiatrist and physician, Dr. David R. Hawkins, in 1975. Dr. Hawkins began research on the kinesiologic response to truth and falsehood. We'll throw a bookmark in Power versus Force, and I want to show you where it ended up much later. Well, how much ever long it took him to write his third book. But it says on the back of this one, see, he started with that story in kinesiology and then ends up to the now widely known map of calibrated through this kinesiological scientific process, the map of now calibrated levels of consciousness was presented in Power versus Force in 1995 and has been translated into all the world's major languages. That was then followed by The Eye of the I, which is this one, and then Reality and Subjectivity, and then Truth versus Falsehood. So I skipped two. There's actually 6, 5? Man, they're all huge too. That's a lot of work, which explored the levels of truth reflected throughout society based on this kinesiology that we've been talking about this episode, which I had no clue we were going to go here. So this is why it's great to just not overthink it and go with the flow and let the universe take you where you're going. But imagine that, exploring. I mean, we could go there, but that's a heavy one. I don't like getting too much into politics and things because then people have too many opinions. And we're just here for philosophy, and usually spiritual philosophy. And so, transcending the levels of consciousness returns to the exploration of the ego and the understanding of the ego and the ego's expressions and inherent limitations, and gives detailed explanations and instructions on how we can transcend them and begin to live as enlightened men and women, as enlightened beings, which is everything we've learned about in the Hermetica and Wayne Dyer's Wisdom of the Ages from all the awesome authors and poets and mystics and philosophers mentioned in that wonderful book, as well as the Tao. And see, I'm telling you, this is all related. As with the reading of Dr. David Hawkins' previous book, the reader's level of consciousness. See, this is the thing he gets into. As you read certain books or take in certain kinds of content, your level of consciousness is affected. And so that's why it's very important, going back to this negative and positive stimuli, to choose and be careful with how much negative content you take in. Horror movies are real popular and a lot of people enjoy them, but it can have a subtle effect that may not be visible But this is all, once again, up for your own opinion. It is a fascinating study, though, this idea of kinesiology, which eventually led to David Hawkins' research and the levels of consciousness and greater understandings. And so, as it says there, as with reading Dr. David Hawkins' previous books, if you have, or any of this great content that we've been doing here, at least some of it, I don't know, I haven't tested it, so that makes me wonder. But the reader's level of consciousness is advanced as a consequence of exposure to the information itself. This opens up new avenues to the relief of suffering for oneself and others, which is why we're here on this channel, to try to do that through thought and understanding and research, which fulfills the quote on the back continues, the purpose of the work and the intention to facilitate the readers and our own enlightenment. But most of all, just the reduction of suffering, or increase our happiness, ladies and gentlemen. Because as I always say, remember, seek to achieve, and maintain happiness through enlightenment. Seek to discover the hidden wisdom, the lost wisdom of the ages, and of even modern times, but seek to discover the mysteries of our history. And hopefully, through this process, we can discover more about the nature of ourselves, our minds, and our spiritual nature, and the way that life works, so that we can have a better understanding of our lives and then use that knowledge to increase the quality of our lives and reduce the suffering. And so remember, there is no way to happiness, because happiness is the way. And the more that we can understand this pathway to creating happiness and bringing it to life, rather than saying, oh, when I'm this kind of person, or when I get that, then I'll be happy, that becomes irrelevant, because then we are there, and hopefully the entire journey is wonderful. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining me today for a unexpected dive into kinesiology and Dr. David Hawkins and power versus force and a talk on consciousness. I never know what I'm going to title these videos, but once again, thank you so much for being here. I love and appreciate all of you, and I'll see you tomorrow on Wednesday Wisdom, diving deeper into the lost wisdom of the pharaohs and the Hermetica. In this next chapter, Hermes reviews his teachings and encourages us to go beyond his words to a profound realization of the truth. All right, ladies and gentlemen. Until tomorrow, be the change that you want to see. Be the example. Thank you.